And now we have Ola Tunander, from Professor Emeritus from PRIO, Peace Research Institute of Oslo. So, Ola, thank you.
Thank you. I think there's something wrong. Okay. I should say a couple of words on my background. I'm from Sweden. I came to Norway in '87 for a position in Norway at the Peace Research Institute. And I wrote my doctoral thesis in the 1980s about the US maritime strategy. And my Swedish version was used as a textbook at a military college in Sweden, and my English dissertation was used at the Naval War College in US, Rhode Island. So I was more, perhaps a little bit more into the military side than Thomas, so to speak. I will start with that in 1992, summer 1992, I went on a military historian trip to Russia. And it was an American organized trip. And my colleague, Robert Bathurst, was a former naval intelligence officer, or heading Naval Intelligence Europe, actually, in the 70s. And I realized quite soon that so almost all of the people were American intelligence people at this trip to Russia. But we had a talk with a Lieutenant General Vladimir Shremnik, who was responsible for the military planning for Northern Europe in the late 70s and 1980s. And we invited, Robert Bathurst and I invited him to Oslo, and he gave a talk in Oslo and so on. And it was quite interesting in the sense that the Russians were thinking in buffer zones. You have to have a buffer zone to defend yourself. And that's, you know, the experience from the Charles XII invasion in the 18th century, Napoleon's invasion in the 19th century, and Hitler's or the Nazis' invasion in the 20th century. And what the Russians were thinking of was defensive depth. You have to have a defensive depth, because you couldn't have enemy forces close to your own vital areas, like Leningrad or Murmansk or Moscow and so on. And the same goes for today. When it comes to Ukraine, they could not accept to have Western or US military bases 500 kilometers from Moscow. That's unacceptable for the Russian side. And so what they did, he explained that, and he was responsible for this, that the forces in Leningrad would take Helsinki and go a bit upwards, and the forces in Petrozavodsk, that is, let's see, a little bit higher up here, they would go to middle Finland, and the forces in Kandalaksa, a little bit further north, would go to Rovaniemi and the northern Finland, and possibly the northern tip of Sweden also. And the forces in Murmansk would take Finnmark in northern Norway. So that was the area that they thought they had to control, so to speak, in case of a US-Soviet war. And when it comes to the air bases, you could see in North Norway, they would try to take them out. They would not go into this area with troops, but they would take them out with the most likely nuclear weapons, actually. but with missiles or airplanes. And the same goes for Sweden. I asked him about what would happen if Sweden had accepted US military aircraft on the Swedish bases, because there were certain planning. I mean, I know that the Minister of Defense for 16 years, Sven Andersson, were thinking in these terms that they should, in case there was a war on the Central Front, the US Air Forces in Germany had to go somewhere, and the best option for them was Sweden. So this was the planning actually for a certain time, and I asked Tremnik what would happen, and he said we would take out these bases, but we would not occupy Sweden. I mean, that would be too costly. So it means that you would use missiles primarily to take out the bases, because you couldn't use attack aircraft, or to take out or bomber aircraft to take out these bases, because that you would lose too much aircraft in this. So it means that you, at the time at least, you would most likely use nuclear weapons and take out these bases. And so you could see, you have, on the one hand, you have this, from here you had an area that Russia wanted to have, or Soviet Union at the time, would have to try to control the area. And the area further out in Scandinavia, Sweden and the rest of Norway, except Finnmark, they would take out the American air bases, and UK maybe also. But that means that you have first a zone of control outside Russia. They would have a zone of control, and outside that they have a zone of denial. Actually, the same principle as goes for the American aircraft carrier. They have a zone of sea control, and then they have an area of sea denial, where you deny the enemy entrance for this zone. So this means that it's when it comes to Finland, for example, it's a double stupidity. It's because when Finland enters NATO, that means that Russia has to put a lot of forces to defend their area and control this area. And when Sweden accepts US air bases, Sweden was outside the zone of control, so Sweden didn't. Russia would not attack Sweden actually in case of a war, but because of Sweden accepting US air bases, they will take out these air bases. And with missiles, nowadays with missiles actually. And maybe they could do it with conventional missiles, because the conventional bombs are now stronger or more forceful than they were in the 1970s and 80s. So you have, and when Finland had decided to join NATO, and NATO accepted Finland as a member of NATO, Russia said this will have consequences. And half a year later, Vladimir Putin said that we will recreate the Leningrad military district. Not the St. Petersburg military district, but the Leningrad military district. Just to tell the Finns that this is a new military district that has one purpose, and that is to take Finland. so it's a, in that sense, you know, a real stupidity, you could say. And the Swedes, then the Swedes was accepted as member of NATO, Russia said this will have consequences for Sweden, which actually means that the bases where US will use the air bases that were, I don't think you could see, I think it's 7 or something like that. But there are some air bases, something like Såtenäs, maybe 7.
Skåne.
Sorry?
Skåne.
Ja,
jag kan inte flytta tillbaka dit. Det går inte.
Yeah, there are a few, or 5, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. No, it's a few, and they will be taken out by missiles, and they will direct possibly conventional missile, possibly nuclear missiles, depending on what happens in the war, so to speak. So that is the first issue, and now you could say that it's even in Sweden it may be worse than in Norway, because Norway's base agreement put some restrictions on Norwegian, at least on the rhetoric. It is in Norway there were not supposed to be any bases, and when it comes to the DCA agreement that made with the Norwegians, then it's they don't call it bases actually at all, and but if you look at what says exactly in the agreement, you could say that the agreement is worse than the Turkish agreement, at least. I mean, I had one Norwegian admiral looking at this agreement. He said that, but who should be the commander of the base? It's nothing about who is commander of the base. And actually, it's most likely it is when it's not spelled out, it's most likely an American. So this means that while, for example, in Turkey, in Incirlik base in eastern Turkey, with 4,000 to 5,000 Americans, it was before that at least. It's a Turkish commander, which means that, for example, when you had the war in Iraq in 2003, they said, the Turks said that they denied the Americans to use the base. But there is nothing about that in the Norwegian agreement or in the Swedish. So it seems that at least the Turks understood that they had to have something to defend the sovereignty of the country. But some other countries here don't understand these kind of things. And also you could say that, you know, I'm not a supporter of Erdogan in any sense, but at least you could say that the coup in 2016 seems to have been organized from Incirlik with the American, and you had the former director of national intelligence in US, I lost the name. He said that it seems to have been our people, you know, involved in this coup, 2016 coup attempt against Erdogan. So, and I think another person that I'm not too happy about, maybe Jan Guillou, he said that it was obvious that the Swedish agreement looked like that Sweden had lost the war against the United States. Because otherwise, why should you accept such an agreement? And you could say that in Germany you had these kind of bases, quite a few of them, but Germany actually lost the war. So it's clear to me at least that this is a kind of extreme stupidity, and what you have from I mean, when you listen to the people who supported this, they think that Russia is aggressive and then you have to defend against them. And what you do is to get the Americans in and defend against the Russians. That is the idea. But actually, the Russians want to deny the American presence. So they will attack because the Americans are present and not anything else. And particularly when it comes to Sweden, that is exactly what would happen. They would not attack, Russia would not attack Sweden because Sweden is, you could say, it's very likely that the plans for Northern Europe are the same now as they were in the 70s and 80s, because the geography hasn't changed. So the Swedes will not attack Russia, most likely not, but with the Americans present, that would happen. I mean, you could say that I had one friend who was a pilot, a Norwegian pilot, and his task in the 1960s was to attack Soviet forces in the Baltic states, the air defense control, air defense systems and so on. And he said that to his commander, isn't it the country in between Norway and Soviet Union? And which would be Sweden, of course. And then the commander said that you don't think about that. I mean, we take care of that. So you could say that Sweden and also Finland was very divided during the Cold War. You had on the one hand you have a neutrality and you have a pragmatic political elite that understood that you had to have some kind of collaboration with the East, with the Russians, to not create any kind of trouble in the Northern Europe. But on the other hand, you had also an elite that were very closely tied to the Americans and identified themselves with the Americans, both in Sweden and Finland. And this elite has now come to power, you could say. Yes. Because the others are, they disappeared. They for some reason, when then the more senior diplomats in Sweden try to write in the Swedish, the important Swedish newspaper, they are denied. So it is a. Yeah, I don't know how. Maybe I talk too much.
No. Timbro had one. Timbro.
Yeah. So that's no. I think it's when you look at Norway from 1949, it was clear that they understood that we could not have a policy that was directly threatening to the Russians or the Soviets. We had to have a policy that tried to have a detente and low tension in the Nordic area. And that's why they did not accept US forces in the Finnmark area in the far north. They didn't accept exercises of NATO forces or Western forces in the far north. And they did not accept US or other allied bases in Norway. And they also did not accept nuclear weapons. This was a 3-point. And now you could say that the base point has disappeared in practice, actually. And the exercises in the north disappeared already in the 1990s, because in the 1990s there were close ties with Russia. So there were no reason to have this kind of restrictions, because there were no threat towards Russia at all, you know. And the Russians, you know, took part in the Norwegian exercises as observers and so on. And but still, you could not accept nuclear weapons, really, not in peacetime. And but on the other hand, in the documents, it's clear that Norwegians have no right to control what kind of weapons that the US are having on Norwegian territory. So this means that there's almost nothing left of the old base policy of Norway from 1949, which was a precondition for Norway entering NATO, actually. But maybe I could stop there, and then you have questions and so on.